lying face up and naked. Numerous slash wounds are found in the victim's torso and completely drained of blood. This was the gruesome fate of a woman found dead in the vacant lot of Landmark Park, Los Angeles, in the early hours of January 15, 1947. In a peaceful park in Los Angeles, California, people there were suddenly disturbed when they saw a pathetic corpse on the lawn. January 15, 1947, a woman named Mrs. Betty Bersinger was walking with her 3-year-old daughter when she found Elizabeth Short's body in a vacant lot in Landmark Park.
Hello, California Police Department here. What is your concern?
I glanced to my right and saw this very dead, white body. My goodness, it was so white. It didn't look like anything more than perhaps an artificial model. It was so white and separated in the middle.
The LAPD described Short as 5 feet, 6 inches, 118 pounds, black hair, green eyes, very attractive, bad lower teeth, and fingernails chewed to cream. What is the story behind the tragic death of Elizabeth Short? Who was the murderer? And what are their motives for this killing? This is The Blacklist, and this is the story of Elizabeth Short, the girl who was butchered in half. The Black Dahlia case. On July 29, 1924, she was born in Hyde Park, Boston, Massachusetts, and was raised by her mother and sisters. Her father abandoned them years ago, and they no longer had any relationship with him. However, over time, the father wanted to reconnect with them, and even though the rest of her family didn't accept him, Beth, as they called her affectionately, decided to move in with him when she was 19 years old. Living closely in Hollywood, Beth wanted to take a shot in becoming a celebrity. Unfortunately, things didn't go well with Elizabeth Short at all.
Elizabeth! Where are you?
Didn't I say to clean the bathroom?
Elizabeth!
Look at these dishes, huh? Elizabeth! Elizabeth! And the dishes? Didn't I told you to wash them hours ago? Can't you do anything for once? Elizabeth!
Elizabeth!
Every day, this is the scenario that Elizabeth is facing, slaving away at her father's house. Fed up, Elizabeth decided to leave. She lived in different places all across Los Angeles, going to different hotels, but only staying for a short while. Just like any actresses that struggle getting minor acting roles, she worked as a waitress and as a cashier. But hope still held up to Elizabeth, and she haven't given up on her dream of becoming a celebrity.
But on the night of January 8, 1947, Elizabeth wouldn't catch the sun alive.
After identifying the body by its fingerprint with the help of FBI, the LAPD identified the body as Elizabeth Short, a 22-year-old woman from Boston, Massachusetts. The newspaper called her the Black Dahlia, due to reports that she is seen often wearing black coats and has a very black dyed hair. And the famous murder mystery in 1946, the Blue Dahlia. The autopsy revealed that Elizabeth Short officially suffered from hemorrhage and shock that causes her to die. She had marks on her legs, knees, wrist, right thigh, and neck, suggesting that she had been bound and tortured. Her slit in her mouth was made when she was still alive. She also suffered a concussion from a blow to her head. The autopsy also suggests that someone with surgical skills may have been the responsible for this kill. 9 days after her body was found, an envelope was sent to the officers of the Los Angeles Examiner. The envelope contained Short's social security card, birth certificate, photos, and an address book that was missing a few pages. All of the 13 envelopes that was sent has no fingerprint and is addressed using cut-out letters from movie advertisement, tempting the police. There were hundreds of suspects throughout the investigation and were later cleared. 75 men that was listed in Elizabeth Short's address book, and the majority of them said they only met Elizabeth Short briefly, going on dates with her. 300 medical students were also questioned throughout the investigation. Eventually, the case went cold, and after 70 years, it opened again. There were 4 leading suspects for the brutal death of Elizabeth Short. The first suspect, Robert Red Mann, is a 25-year-old salesman who was dating her at that time. He had previously been discharged from the army and had been described as mentally unstable after suffering multiple nervous breakdowns. Manley was the last known person to see Elizabeth Short. The two had returned from a trip to San Diego on the 8th of January 1947, and Manley dropped her off in front of the Biltmore Hotel in Hollywood the following day. He was picked up for the questioning a few days later when Short's body was found. Fortunately for him, he had a solid alibi for the time of the murder.
She was my girlfriend. We started dating about a month ago. At first, she doesn't want to talk with me, but eventually I get her. We had just returned from a trip to San Diego on January 8, 1947. I dropped her home about 6:30 p.m. in front of Biltmore Hollywood the day after. And that's the last time I saw her.
Plus, he also agreed to take a lie detector test on 2 separate occasions and pass both. Robert Red Manley was then cleared as a suspect. Dr. Walter Alonzo Bailey, a Los Angeles surgeon who lived in a house 1 block south of the vacant lot in which Elizabeth Short's body was found, until he left his wife in October 1946. The only connection Bailey has with Elizabeth was Bailey's daughter was a friend of Elizabeth Short's sister Virginia, and the brother-in-law Adrian, and had been the matron of honor at their wedding. In secret testimony, Detective Harry Hansen, one of the original investigators, told the 1949 Los Angeles County Grand Jury that in his opinion the killer was a top medical man and a fine surgeon. Bailey was 67 years old at the time of the murder and had no known history of violence or criminal activity of any kind, and is not known to have met Short, even though his daughter was a friend of Short's oldest sister.
But, plausible that Beth had gone to ask Bailey for financial help and ended up staying for a few days.
But the fact remains that Bailey's resume is way too convincing to overlook. He was a skilled surgeon, he lived 1 block away from the spot Beth was found at, and his private workspace was 5 blocks away from the hotel that Beth was last in now.
When Bailey died in January 1948, his autopsy showed that he was suffering from degenerative brain disease. After his death, Bailey's widow alleged that his mistress knew a terrible secret about Bailey and claimed this was the reason the mistress was the main beneficiary upon his death. Could this terrible secret is the answer to the unsolved case of the Black Dahlia? The third suspect in the list, Leslie Dillon, is a 27-year-old bellhop. He used to work as a mortician's assistant, so he knew how to handle a corpse, clean it, and drain it of blood. He inserted himself into the investigation by writing to discuss the case with LAPD psychiatrist Dr. J. Paul River. He first wrote to Dr. River asking for information on the case, claiming he had an interest in sadists and psychopaths for a book that he intended to write. He then expressed his belief that a friend of his named Jeff Connors was the man who killed Elizabeth Short during his correspondence. Dillon showed intimate knowledge of the murder, and eventually the psychiatrist became convinced that Dillon, the bellhop, was the real killer, and Jeff Connors was in fact a violent extension of his own personality. The LAPD brought Dillon into custody, but were later surprised when San Francisco police called them to let them know that they had found Jeff Connors. He was indeed real, and he worked in Los Angeles at the time of the murder as a handyman for Columbia Studios. However, other than Dillon's opinion, there was nothing to connect him to the crime as far as the bellhop was concerned. Police were eventually forced to move on after finding enough evidence to suggest that Dillon may have been in San Francisco at the time of the murder.
For a while, Dillon was the police's main suspect, and even in modern times, multiple crime buff writers and former detectives still consider him the Black Dahlia killer.
The last and by far the most famous suspect in this entire case and among the public, George Hodel, is commonly considered the man who did it. He came to the attention of the police in 1949 when he was charged but acquitted of sexually assaulting his own daughter. He was a doctor, so he had the medical knowledge. He was suspected of involvement in the death of his secretary from a drug overdose. He was also interviewed in 1949 in a different killing known as the Green Twig Murder. At one point, police bagged his home but couldn't obtain incriminating evidence. Hodel died in 1999 but he came back into the spotlight as a prominent suspect courtesy of his son. Steve Hodel is a retired LAPD detective who has become convinced that his father killed Elizabeth Short all those years ago. Going through his father's belongings, he found evidence such as personal photographs of a young woman he believes to be the aspiring actress, as well as letters from his father, whose handwriting matches the letters of the killer taunting the police, and sent Short's personal address book to a local newspaper decades ago. The letter was written by hand, turning in Wednesday, January 29. Had my fun with police. Black Dahlia Avenger. There's also a tape record of him saying,
Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead.
Steve Hodel has spent the last 2 decades trying to convince others that George Hodel was the man who killed Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia.